China, 1919. 5,000 university students from Beijing and the surrounding areas gathered at the gates of Heavenly Peace in Tiananmen Square as part of a massive demonstration meant to protest against the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. In previous years, China had faced defeat after humiliating defeat and was slowly losing the little power it had to begin with. It was truly a dying nation. The people were beginning to lose hope and felt that China would fall under the control of a more powerful nation. A change was needed, but there was disagreement about the course of action to be taken.
He was educated in the United States. People who were educated in the United States and England tended to see China getting stronger in a gradual evolutionary way. You don't need a revolution. You don't need communism. You don't need radical changes. Slow, steady progress. But the Marxists, like Mao and Li and Chen, who later became the founder of the Chinese Communist Party along with the librarian Li, said, no, we don't have the luxury to wait decades for this gradual evolutionary run. You know, we need a revolution now. We're falling to pieces. And look what happened in Russia, throwing the czars, becoming communist, and that's what we need in China. So there is a difference between the evolutionary road and the revolutionary road.
The first recorded form of government in China dates back to 2100 BCE with the Shi dynasty. From that point on, China was ruled by a succession of different emperors for over 4,000 years, one of the longest-running consistent forms of government in the world. This consistency bound the Chinese people by tradition and prevented China from following the rest of the world in modernization, causing them to quickly fall behind. It wouldn't be until 1911 when China would finally see the beginnings of change, and even later for those changes to make a difference. The last of China's numerous dynasties was the Qing, which ruled from 1644 to 1911. Throughout this time period, the people's wishes were often ignored, and the government thought only of itself and gaining power and wealth. This caused great resentment among the people. However, most feared change more than they hated poverty. Finally, a brave leader emerged. His name was Sun Yat-sen. He is often referred to as the founder of modern China because he motivated the people to rebel against the government and tried to restore China to its former glory, thus regaining its proper status in the eyes of the other world superpowers. Despite this shift in power, the change was mainly in name only, because China was divided into several different provinces, each of which had their own ruling warlord. These warlords had enough power to control their own area and refused to give up that power because they were opposed to a central governing body. Thus, the Republic of China was easily taken advantage of by other world powers, particularly by Japan. During this time period, Japan was rapidly expanding its influence throughout much of Asia, and it had now set its sights on China. So, in 1914, Japan took advantage of the Western allies, such as the United States and Great Britain, whose sole focus was the First World War in Europe, by declaring war on Germany. Japan quickly took control of Germany's territories in China, one of which was the province of Shandong. During World War I, Japan attempted to further their control in China by making a list of 21 demands that it wished to impose upon them. Some of these demands included recognizing Japanese control over Shandong and Manchuria provinces and allowing them to have railway and mining privileges there along with other special concessions, not allowing the land to be leased to any other foreign country except Japan, opening all of the Chinese ports, bays, and harbors to Japan, and control over China's political and financial affairs. If these demands were not accepted, Japan offered war as the only other option. In order to avoid problems, the president of China at the time, Yuan Shikai, agreed to all 21 demands. China decided to fight back against this unfair deal in 1917 by joining in the war and fighting alongside the Allies in hopes of defeating Japan and being included in the post-war bargaining. Their ultimate goal was to regain the lost Shandong province and prove themselves a worthy competitor against Japan. The First World War ended in favor of the Allied nations, and China expected to be given back their rights to the Shandong province. However, it was not returned, and despite their persuasive pleas, they were once again defeated by Japan, who was given all of Germany's economic possessions in that region. The Chinese viewed this transfer as a betrayal by the Western powers and also as a symbol of Japanese aggression and of the weakness of their corrupt warlord government under Yuan Shikai. China was humiliated at the peace conference in Versailles, and when the people heard of the conditions of the treaty, they were infuriated. This dispute was referred to as the Shandong problem and was the final push the people of China needed in order to finally take a stand against the government and start the much-needed revolution. In China at this time, many of the students were looking towards the United States for higher education and were, therefore, being exposed to both Western cultures and other forms of government. It was these students who saw the need for a major revolution in order to save their dying nation. So on the afternoon of May 14, 1919, at 1:30 p.m. approximately, 5,000 students from Peking University and 13 other colleges and universities in Beijing gathered at the gates of Heavenly Peace in Tiananmen Square to protest against the decision to give the Shandong province to Japan, written down in the Treaty of Versailles. The initial demonstration started out peaceful, but eventually the students ended up assaulting China's Minister of Japan and burning down the house of the Minister of Communications. Demonstrations were being held throughout the country and many boycotts were held against Japanese goods. Very few protesters were actually killed. However, over 1,000 were arrested. This movement also began to spread rapidly throughout the nation to many publications, such as the Siang River Review, the Nonokai Daily, and the New Youth, which provided information on the weaknesses of the current government and the many ways China had been wronged in order to rouse the people in support of the movement. The May 4th movement was the spark China needed to light the fire in the hearts of the people and give them hope that they desperately longed for. In the couple decades prior to the movement, China had been faced with the reality that they were far behind the other nations of the world, and without a major change they would likely die off. Their government was in shambles, the people were poor and unhappy, only a small portion of the population could read and write, and the people were bound by traditional values and thinking. China was in need of change, but few people had any clear ideas on what to change and how to change it, resulting in a few attempts but little success. It wasn't until the May 4th movement, when the students of China finally took a stand and argued for complete reform, rather than a few small changes, that China was able to advance and take those first few important steps. It was a long struggle that lasted for years, but the courage of those first students was passed down through the generations, leading to more movements, demonstrations, and reform. Changes were evident in all aspects of Chinese culture, from their writing systems to women's rights and all the way to their type of government. The new China truly resembled its past self in name only, because the new direction it was taking was completely different than the path that led to ruin it had previously been on. Although communism is often viewed with a negative connotation, The philosophy behind it is what propelled China upward from one of its lowest points and allowed it to regain a spot as one of the world's major superpowers.